In this video, I'd like to take some time to discuss resistance. Resistance can be thought of as conscious or even unconscious defense against change. Resistance is the articulation of counterpoints to reasons for change. Generally, when resistance is encountered, motivational interviewing assumes that it is on the part of the listener to ensure resistance is minimized. Also, motivational interviewing assumes resistance is a natural aspect to interpersonal interactions. Resistance is inherent within communication and is hardwired into our psychology. It is also assumed that resistance can be avoided through positive interactions. Because of this, motivational interviewing identifies resistance and then responds to it in a way that is positive and does not make the individual defend that resistance. It's important to view a person's resistance as a way to learn more about that person and their beliefs. It's also important to know that if you encounter frequent resistance, it is likely that that person is early in the stages of change. So we are going to cover the 4 types of resistance and then give you practical tools to address resistance. Have I said resistance enough yet? There are 4 main categories of resistance. I guess not. Reluctance, rebellion, resignation, and rationalization. Reluctance, rebellion, resignation, and rationalization. That's way too many R's. Reluctance, rebellion, resignation, and rationalization. Yeah! The first type of resistance.
It's rebellion.
No, you repeat after me. The first type of resistance.
The first type of resistance
Is reluctance.
is rebellion.
Okay, say, the first type of resistance
The first type of resistance
is reluctance.
rebellion.
Can you say it to the microphone? Say, the first type of resistance is reluctance.
It's rebellion.
Okay, say, the first type of resistance is rebellion.
The first type of resistance is reluctance.
People with reluctant resistance tend to not want to consider the change at all. They are very passive about their problem. So what would that mean for our friend Clifton? If Clifton were reluctant, he may just shut down when you bring up the idea of change. He also may seem to not really know what you're even talking about. You may say to Clifton, "What effect has your late nights had on your school?" Clifton may respond,
What? They haven't had any effect. I don't need much sleep at night, and really, I can catch up on the weekends.
with reluctance, it is so important to be empathetic and sensitive. Recognize that their progress could be very slow or very fast. It just depends on how fully conscious they are of the problem. Slowly, their understanding will move towards at least a recognition of the problem. Rebellion is the next type of resistance.
Rebellion.
These people tend to know a lot about their problem. They understand the various effects it may have on other people. Rebellious resistors tend to be argumentative and hostile. They even feel like their sense of choice is being impeded. This type of resistance is rooted in strong emotion. It tends to be less logical and more feeling driven. If you ask Clift, "How are you feeling about your grades?" he may respond with,
They're fine. I'm doing great. Why do you care?
This is why it is important to address the fact that no one can make them change. Affirm their autonomy. Giving power over them regarding change helps them to accept that the problem is a problem. They aren't being forced to change, and it is up to them when the change happens. It is less threatening to admit there is a problem if you are the one in control of when that problem may be addressed. Resignation-resistant responses tend to indicate the individual has given up on change. The speaker is overwhelmed by the problem. It seems too big to take on. Talks center around all of their attempts to change their behavior. With this type of resistance, it is important to support self-efficacy. The person needs to know that yes, it will be hard to change, but that it is not impossible. Let's use Clifton. Clifton says,
I've always struggled with staying interested in school. I've done so many different things in high school to keep focused, but nothing seems to work.
a quick reflection back to Clifton may help. You've worked hard to change in the past, even though it hasn't always worked. This reframes Clifton's thought into This reframes Clifton's thoughts into a more positive form while still acknowledging the fact that his efforts haven't worked. A quick tip. Did you notice how I said you've worked hard to change in the past even though it hasn't always worked? I didn't say but it hasn't always worked. This is a very simple way to utilize reflection in a way that keeps it all sounding positive. Finally, we have rationalization. This type of resistance is slightly different than the rebellious kind, but this resistance is grounded in thinking rather than emotion. These people seem to have all the answers to all the counter questions. A point against the habit is brought up, a counterpoint is immediately given. You want to stay away from this kind of rationalization. They tend to put the blame for their behavior outside themselves. One of the best ways to address this kind of resistance is through empathy and reflective listening. Asking questions about the positive things about change behavior helps work through their rationalization. Now, to wrap up all these types of resistance, I want to point out that the person is not going to nice and neatly fall into one of these 4 categories. More than likely, they will have some things that they are reluctant in and other things that they are quite rebellious about. Don't pigeonhole people into a type as you are speaking to them about their reasons for change. Try to recognize what type of resistance is being expressed and make sure your response is appropriate. So now that we've discussed the various types of resistance, let's discuss the main way that you can deal with resistance. But before we jump into the practical sides, I want to emphasize something. This reflection is not meant to be used in a way to get people to do what you want. One of the central underpinnings of motivational interviewing is autonomy of the individual. What you are doing is making sure that your response, the part that you have control over, doesn't make the situation worse. And if you're lucky, your response may point them in a more positive direction. So please keep that in mind. What is reflection? Reflection is your main ally and tool when you encounter resistance. There are several different kinds of reflections, but for the sake of time, I've narrowed down the most useful to these four: simple reflection, amplified reflection, double-sided reflection, reassurance of personal choice. Simple reflection is the acknowledgement of the person's disagreement, feeling, or perception. Clifton says,
It's not like staying up late is going to make a big difference. There is coffee for a reason, you know.
your simple reflection could be, you don't think staying up late will have much of an impact on you. When you give reflections, you help clarify that person's belief. You are not repeating what is said, you are giving them a reinterpretation of what they've said. When you give a reflection, the person is free to accept or reject your interpretation. Clifton may respond to your reflection by saying,
Yes, exactly. It may hurt a little bit, but it's not really a big deal.
this may mean you need to take a different route. Amplified reflection is an exaggerated form of what the person said, and it must be done empathetically. If you come across sarcastic or too extreme, you may end up with increased resistance. Clifton says,
I'm not sure I can really be disciplined to go to the library to study when my friends are possibly doing something fun.
your amplified reflection could be, you can't go to the library because you're worried about missing out. Notice that the exaggeration isn't too extreme. The key word here is can't. This reflection may receive the response of,
Well, it's not that I can't. I am capable of going to the library.
this amplification nudges Clifton onto the subject of his own self-efficacy, which you want to explore. Next, we have double-sided reflection, which attempts to capture both sides of the ambivalence. One key point when using double-sided reflections is to use the conjunction and. Remember, Clifton wants to save the world through eco-gastronomy. Clifton says,
I really don't know what to do. I want to change the world. There's so much to do. College makes me feel like I have to jump through all these hoops to get to where I want to be.
your double-sided reflection might sound something like this. You have a lot of energy and passion, and you feel bogged down by school. This captures his desire to get where he wants to go, that is, saving the planet, but also acknowledges that he's not feeling motivated to gain the needed credentials. Double-sided reflection doesn't pit two opposing views against each other, it simply boils down what those views are. The final type of reflection I want to cover is reassurance of personal choice and control. When you reassure personal choice and control, you attempt to focus on the fact that, in the end, it is their decision. When you reassure personal choice, you attempt to focus on the fact that, in the end, it is their decision. Clifton may say,
I don't want to take notes in class. I didn't have to do it in high school.
you may respond by reassuring them. It's totally up to you how you spend your time in class. This information is pretty practical when it comes to everyday life. Resistance is a part of the human experience. I think recognizing this fact can help us in our communication not only with other people, but with ourselves. When something bothers us or makes us upset, that may be a sign that we need to take a moment to stop and think about why it is bothering us. When we feel ourselves resisting an idea, we may need to be open to both sides of the argument. What kind of world could you create if you just took some time to listen and reflect in a way that didn't make someone feel like they had to defend themselves? What kind of world could you create if you took some time to empathize even with unreasonable ideas? Are you more likely to change someone's mind by telling them what you think, or by responding showing that you understand their point of view? Roll with resistance, my friends. Thanks for listening. Until next time.